The alarm on my wrist pulsed red before I even opened my eyes. Not the soft chime we used for morning shifts. This was the sound reserved for one thing only. A convoy was down. I sat up in my quarters aboard the relay station and stared at the message scrolling across my screen. 17 ships. Civilian relief vessels. Gone in less than 4 minutes. My hands were shaking before I even understood why. My name is Callum Barr, and 3 days ago I was just another human liaison working under the Kryvex Dominion, the alien power that had ruled over Earth and a dozen other worlds for the last 100 years. We were told they were our protectors. We were told the fleet stationed above our planet was there to keep us safe from raiders and rogue factions roaming the outer systems. I believed that, until I read the files. It started with a name I trusted. Overseer Vexandri had been my direct contact for 6 years. He taught me how the Dominion worked, how to survive inside their system, how to keep my head down, and my people fed. When the convoy went dark, he was the one who called me into his office, calm as ever, and told me the story we were going to tell the public. He said the convoy was destroyed by pirates. But I had already seen the flight logs. I had already seen the coordinates. The convoy did not wander into pirate territory. It was redirected there, on his authorization, to hide a trade violation the Dominion did not want exposed. Thousands of people, families, children, sacrificed to protect a paperwork lie. I did not scream. I did not confront him. I sat there and nodded, and I memorized every word he said, because I understood something in that moment that changed everything for me. If they could do this to cover up a shipping error, they had been doing far worse to us for 100 years, and calling it protection the entire time. That night I did not sleep. I sat in the dark with a stolen data drive in my hand, and I made a choice that would end my old life completely. I did not go to the news networks. I did not walk into a public square and shout the truth. I had seen what happened to the last person who tried that. He disappeared within a day, and the Dominion called it a transfer to a research post that never existed. Instead, I went quiet. I found the people who were already angry, already doubting, already tired of pretending the leash around our necks was a warm embrace. Engineers who had been building things in secret because they were sick of asking Dominion officials for permission to innovate. Veterans who remembered friends lost in border skirmishes that were never properly explained. And it was not only humans. Other species under Dominion control had their own quiet lists of grievances, their own private doubts they were too afraid to speak aloud. I gave them the files. I gave them the convoy logs, the redirected coordinates, the private messages between Andre and his superiors, joking about acceptable losses. I did not ask them to trust me. I asked them to read. Within a week, the story had changed shape entirely. It was no longer about pirates attacking a helpless convoy. It was about an empire willing to sacrifice its own citizens to protect a lie, and once people saw that clearly, they could not unsee it. The Dominion had spent a century keeping humanity's technology capped, always one step behind, always dependent. What they never understood was that limits do not stop human minds, they just force us to get creative. While their engineers followed strict protocols and safe designs, ours had spent decades quietly building workarounds, adaptive systems, unconventional solutions born from having to make do with less. We had been improvising in silence for 100 years, and nobody had bothered to notice. The first real test came 3 weeks after the convoy incident, when a Dominion enforcement squadron arrived at the edge of our home system to, in their words, restore order. I was standing in the command hub of a converted mining vessel when the alert came through. My hands found the console before my mind had even caught up. We did not have their firepower. We did not have their numbers. What we had was a plan nobody expected, because nobody thought we were capable of planning at all. Dominion doctrine relied on predictable formations, disciplined spacing, controlled engagement patterns drilled into their pilots since childhood. Our ships scattered instead of holding formation, We used decoy signals stitched together from decades of scavenged technology, sending their sensors chasing ghosts across 3 different sectors at once. By the time their commanders realized the real threat was coming from an entirely different vector, half their squadron had already lost coordination. I remember the voice of my friend Rowan Blake crackling over the comm, steady despite the chaos around us. Rowan had been a transport pilot before all this, someone who moved cargo between colonies and never expected to fly anything resembling a warship. That day, he flew like he had been born for it, weaving between defensive lines that were never designed to stop something this unpredictable. The squadron withdrew before the day was over. Not because we destroyed them, but because their commanders could not risk reporting a defeat that would embarrass the Dominion leadership. Silence became our best weapon. They wanted this kept quiet as badly as we did, just for different reasons. News of that withdrawal spread faster than anything the Dominion could contain. Other client worlds, other species who had been living under the same quiet leash, started asking questions they had been too afraid to ask before. If humanity could push back an enforcement squadron with scavenged ships and unconventional tactics, maybe the empire that ruled over all of us was not as unbeatable as we had been taught to believe. I traveled to 3 different systems in the following months, meeting with representatives from species I had only ever seen in Dominion propaganda broadcasts, always shown as grateful subjects thanking their benevolent rulers. In person, they were exhausted, tired of restrictions on their research, tired of trade deals that always seemed to favor the Dominion, tired of pretending gratitude for a system that kept them small on purpose. A representative named Aveline Torres, originally from one of the outer mining colonies, became one of our strongest allies during this time. She had lost family in a border dispute the Dominion blamed on rogue elements that conveniently disbanded before any investigation could reach them. When she saw the convoy files, she did not hesitate. She brought 3 entire colony fleets into the growing resistance within a month. What followed was not a single dramatic battle, but a slow, steady unraveling. System by system, client worlds began withdrawing cooperation. Trade routes the Dominion depended on started drying up. Their enforcement squadrons, spread thin trying to maintain order across dozens of worlds at once, found themselves stretched past what their doctrine had ever prepared them for. I stood on the bridge of what had once been a cargo freighter, now refitted as a command vessel, watching a display show 3 more systems declaring independence from Dominion oversight within a single day. Rowan stood beside me, quieter than usual. He asked me if I ever regretted it. Taking those files instead of burning them. Choosing this path instead of staying quiet and safe. I told him the truth. I regretted nothing about exposing the lie. What weighed on me was watching people I once respected become enemies overnight. Watching a system I had spent years working inside collapse under the weight of its own dishonesty. There was no joy in that, only the uneasy relief of finally seeing clearly. The final confrontation came at the Dominion's central command station, orbiting their homeworld, the place where decisions about 100 worlds had been made without a single one of those worlds having a real voice in the outcome. Our combined fleet, humans and allied species together, arrived not with the intention of destruction, but with a demand that could no longer be ignored. Overseer Andrei was there when negotiations began, older than I remembered, the calm confidence from that night in his office long gone. He tried to argue that everything the Dominion had done was necessary, that limiting our growth had kept the peace, that exposing the convoy cover-up had only caused chaos where order once stood. I looked at him and said the only thing that mattered. Order built on a lie is not peace. It is just control, wearing a peaceful mask. The negotiations that followed were not simple, and they were not quick. Old systems of control do not dismantle themselves in a single conversation, but for the first time in a century, humanity and the other client species sat at that table not as subjects asking for mercy, but as equals demanding fair terms. Months later, I stood on a balcony overlooking Earth, watching ships that were once symbols of oppression now flying alongside our own, part of a new alliance built on something closer to honesty than anything the Dominion had ever offered. Rowan was there too, along with Aveline, and dozens of others who had risked everything on nothing more than a stolen data drive, and the hope that truth still mattered. I thought about Andrei often in those days, not with hatred, though I had every reason to feel it. Mostly I thought about how easily trust can be used as a weapon, and how one small act, one quiet decision to expose a lie instead of burying it, had unraveled a century of control across an entire galaxy. We did not become conquerors. That was the promise I made to myself the night I first read those convoy logs, and it was the promise I intended to keep. What we became instead was something the old empire never accounted for. A group of species who remembered exactly what it felt like to be silenced, and who chose, together, never to silence anyone else the same way again. The galaxy did not belong to any single power after that. It belonged to everyone willing to stand up when the lie finally became too heavy to carry. And it all started with one convoy, one betrayal, and one choice to read the files instead of burning them.